Latina activism is strong today in the United States, and similar to the past, activists are tackling a range of issues that affect the daily lives of millions of Latina women and their families.
Since the 1960s, with visible leaders like Dolores Huerta, who commanded attention, and strong women like Helen Chavez, who worked behind the scenes, Latinas have become a force for societal change. These Latina activists of the past employed maternalist rhetoric to push for progress in order to secure a better future for their children. Such activism paved the way for other Latinas to become politically and socially active. Leaders in the 1980s and 1990s, like Gloria Anzaldúa, maintained some of the maternalist rhetoric, but also shifted focus to spiritual activism and introspection. These previous activists and their work influences and also paved the way for Latina activism today. Young Latinas are politically engaged and fighting for immigration rights, not only for themselves and their future children, like activists from the past, but they are also fighting for their parents. Latina activism began as a result of maternalistic ideals, but since the 1960s has evolved to the inverse of maternalism, activism in the name of youth protecting their parents. While there was much male participation in the farm labor unionization effort, activism of Helen Chavez and Dolores Huerta was integral to the mission. Chavez's approach to activism followed traditional female leadership through bookkeeping, phone calls, and mailings for the United Farm Laborers. While this activism was largely behind the scenes, Chavez kept the movement running smoothly and was still able to prioritize her family, especially her children. Chavez was also the wife of UFW President Cesar Chavez, meaning she could be involved in the movement and also supportive of her husband in the struggle for farm workers' rights. Early in Huerta's activism, she took on more supportive roles, but as her career developed, Huerta became more prominent in the movement, and her activism style became more assertive, rallying, and emotional. She defied and competed directly with her male counterparts in her rebellion against conventional constraints against women in activism. Despite the more prominent role in rebellious activism, Huerta led with maternalistic ideals. She brought her children to rallies, was endlessly proud of them, and spoke with passion on ensuring an equitable future for the workers and their children. Despite having vastly different leadership styles, both Dolores Huerta and Helen Chavez were concerned about the future for their children and fought to ensure their children would have more opportunities for success. Both women were an inspiration for the activists that followed them. Latina activism did not diminish after Huerta and Chavez, but activists did use different mediums and perspectives as they continued to fight for children and the leaders of the future. Gloria Anzaldúa published several written works in the 1980s and 1990s that focused on Latinas living in the borderlands between the United States and Mexico in order to inform people of the unique struggles they faced and gain support for social reform. Anzaldúa pushed forth the concept of spiritual activism, the idea that we are all interconnected humans, and by changing ourselves to be more compassionate, we can make peace between all people of the world. While this may sound far-fetched, this way of thinking was bold and empowering because it gave each person hope that they could individually create change in the world. She argues that without protest, oppression will continue, and that only together, as a network of kindred spirits, can we be a force for change. This concept influenced leaders not only in Anzaldúa's era, but also young leaders today.
The idea of working together for change unites all people and ensures that children and adolescents will be given a brighter future.
Because of ideas like spiritual activism from Anzaldúa and the maternalist focus of Chavez and Huerta, Latina youth activists of today have the opportunity to take an active role in political changes and are capitalizing on that opportunity. Today's Latina youth activists do use rhetoric that encourages future development, but also includes a focus opposite of the maternalist rhetoric, a focus on the hope of a positive future for their parents.
In large numbers, these youth are gathering, learning, and making positive social change.
While the largest issue that today's Latina youth hope to tackle is immigration reform, other issues including higher education, employment, and race-based violence loom large. From 2009 to 2010, protesting for recognition and in support of the DREAM Act, young Latina activists were heavily involved in sit-ins, hunger strikes, marches, and symbolic graduations outside of Capitol buildings. In large numbers, Latinas have taken to the streets, coming out as undocumented immigrants to demonstrate just how many people are affected by the immigration policies of the United States. In 2012, the Obama administration announced a plan known as Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, that would allow undocumented immigrants who arrived as children to remain in the U.S. without threat of deportation if they met certain requirements, but it did not offer a path to permanent residency. Angie Rivera found out that she was undocumented after her high school graduation when she was applying for college. What she had hoped would be one of the most exciting times of her life quickly became a traumatic experience, so she got involved in the fight for immigration reform. She now runs an advice column for undocumented youth and their families called Ask Angie that she hopes helps people navigate the difficult and often frightening waters of being an undocumented immigrant. Many undocumented immigrants protected by the DACA program are now in fear that by outing themselves previously to gain the protections offered by this act, they are now going to be targeted for deportation since President Trump did not renew the program. In fact, the Women's March on Washington that coincided with the inauguration of President Trump included many Latina activists bringing to light issues of immigration. One speaker, 6-year-old undocumented immigrant Sophie Cruz, gave a short but impassioned speech in both Spanish and English on the importance of love and supporting one another. Sophie Cruz, as well as many other Latinas, plays on the rhetorical ideal of protection for children and ensuring a future that is safe for all people, a similar ideal to activists of the past.
My name is Sophie Cruz. We are here together, making a chain of love to protect our families. Let us fight with love, faith, and courage so that our families will not be destroyed. I also want to tell the children not to be afraid because we are not alone. There are still many people that have their hearts filled with love and tenders to snuggle in this path of life. Let's keep together and fight for the rights. God is with us.
Sophie Cruz also provides the perfect example of the inverse of maternalist rhetoric. She is fighting not only for young people like her, but for the protection of her parents and other young Latinas' parents. It is the hope of young activists like Sophie that families will not be torn apart and undocumented adults will be offered protections so they can live without fear of being deported and leaving their children behind. Young Sophie first gained notoriety when she wrote a letter to Pope Francis because she was afraid her parents would be deported and the family would be separated. Oftentimes, the walkouts, sit-ins, and rallies organized by youth are a result of the pain of seeing parents deported. About 1 in 5 children in the United States is either an immigrant or the child of an immigrant, so these issues are especially salient as children fight for family stability through immigration reform. While the current methods of activism have changed since the mid-20th century, there has always been a need for change within society. The first wave of Latina activists led with strong maternalist rhetoric to create a brighter, more equitable future for their children. Activism continued through the 1980s and 1990s with some similar rhetorical strategy, but activism also began to evolve to a more introspective models and ideas. Today, Latina youth activists are able to organize and speak out about issues in present-day society because of the work that past Latina activists have done. Without maternalistic rhetoric of past Latina activists, there would be a much different scene for Latina youth organizing today. Young Latinas are embracing the political activism that their predecessors had hoped for as they continue to fight for a better future for themselves, for their future children, and also for their parents.